Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda. Kushaq, choose what really matters.
A long day, the Quad will be mentioned numerous times. You'll hear about the Indo-Pacific. So we'll do a quick recap for you and brush your memory on what the Quad is, the so-called Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. It began as a tsunami relief group back in 2004. India, the United States, Australia and Japan came together in the aftermath of the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. It was an ad hoc grouping. Once the relief work was over, the group dissolved. They met again in 2007 and then again in 2017 after a 10-year-long wait. It's September 2021 now, and the Quad are finally meeting in person. That's going to happen on Friday. What are these four countries looking to achieve through this alliance? And in the run-up to the Quad meeting, of course, we have the bilaterals that Prime Minister Modi is going to have with Quad members. We'll discuss all of this. Joining me in our Washington studio is Dr. Mukesh Aghi. He's the President and CEO of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. He's also worked closely with the industry and the administration here in the US and in India to promote trade between the two countries. Also with us is Ambassador Kurt Tong. He is a partner at the Asia Group and he has served as the US Ambassador for APEC. We have Lester Munson. He's joining us in the studio. He's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute. He has served as the staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Gentlemen, welcome to WION.
Thank you.
Dr. Aghi, let me begin with you. The Prime Minister has had a meeting with CEOs of some American companies today, and he will be meeting Kamala Harris later in the day. What is India looking at in this relationship with the US at this stage?
Well, I think multiple factors India is looking at. One is more investment, more technology, and sense of peace on the border for at least next 20, 30 years so its economic agenda continue to grow. I think India is also looking at partnership on vaccine diplomacy to be able to export vaccine to the rest of the world. So I think the discussions will be varied, but they will focus a lot on economic agenda quite a bit.
Ambassador Tong, this is a time when a lot of alliances are being shaped all over again.
Right.
America has been accused of dumping its allies. We've seen what happened with France recently and the recall of the ambassador. We've seen the abandonment, quote unquote, of Afghanistan. As world leaders come here to meet Joe Biden, how much should they invest in this relationship?
Well, I think they should invest a lot, but it is incumbent on the United States to show that it has consistency, staying power, and the ability to listen to what other countries would like to see from the United States in terms of policy and cooperation. So I expect to see a lot of that this week, particularly at the Quad meeting, where there's going to be a focus on COVID response, on climate, on issues that really all the participants share. It definitely moved beyond the idea of the United States dictating the agenda and others being in listening mode.
I've been talking to leaders and stakeholders from various Quad member countries, and they all insist that Quad stands for something and not against someone. How do you tackle a threat that you cannot even name?
Well, that's a great question, but I think it's important for the four members of the Quad and for like-minded countries to focus on the things that they do have in common, which is a respect for the rule of law, democratic institutions, and a respect for human rights. And those are the things that actually, in the long run, will bring all of these countries closer together. There's no doubt about that. Yes, China is sitting out there as the alternative view as an authoritarian government, and there are some definite concerns about Chinese actions, but galvanizing those countries around the values they share is hugely important, especially as we're seeing shifting alliances and the balance of the world changing a little bit over time. It's really important to invest in those values.
Values and relationships, you say. Dr. Aghi, Prime Minister Biden was Vice President, President Biden, was Vice President, and Prime Minister Modi came here last. And this is their first meeting since he took office. How would you describe this relationship? And while the two countries have a lot going for each other, how do the two leaders see each other?
Well, I think you have to understand Prime Minister Modi loves to build a one-to-one relationship. He had a very strong relationship with President Trump, and he plans to build the same relationship with President Biden. With President Trump, the relationship was more transactional. This is going to be more multilateral, focusing on Indo-Pacific region, focusing on economic agenda, focusing on security, technology transfer, and are very much on the vaccine diplomacy. So I think you'll see a multilateral approach and discussions happening between the two countries, between the two, president and the prime minister, to see how they make it successful.
Now we have a new strategic alliance called AUKUS, which is clearly a military alliance. Where does it leave the Quad? Will the Quad have a military dimension? Should it have a military dimension, or should it only work on climate change, vaccine diplomacy, values, etc.?
Well, I think at this time, none of the Quad members are talking about making it into a military alliance. There is close military information sharing and coordination bilaterally between all the members of the Quad. It's notable that there have been 2+2 meetings between each of the 4 members in the recent year that have been very substantive. But I don't think that's the purpose of the grouping, and nor is that going to be the direction for it in the medium term. I think the Indian government said that the AUKUS and the Quad there's not really much overlap there, and I think that's a correct statement.
You use the word purpose. I want to understand, and I've read so much about the Quad. What is the purpose of the Quad? And is it something we've defined, or is it still like a...
Well, to me, and I don't know how you'll receive this as an Indian citizen, but the purpose is to have the world's second largest country, soon to be the world's largest, look east, think about its values positively in the same frame of mind as the other members of the Quad, emphasize democracy, emphasize cooperation, economic openness, and work that approach towards governance and foreign relations over decades in a way that will really benefit India and the world. I think India is the most important member of the Quad. It's the one that is not part of a military alliance with the United States. It's the one that is not a fully developed economy, and so bringing those relationships together and bringing it all along, I think has enormous potential.
It does, and from what you're saying, the implication seems to be that India is not doing all of those things, and India is the only member of the Quad that shares a land border with China, so the stakes are that much higher for India. Do you want to respond to this?
Yes, I think if you look at India is one country which has physically suffered from the aggression of China. And while we may say that it is not a military alliances, India is looking at the Quad in some way to counter China. And at the same time, it's looking at investment coming in, it's looking at technology coming in. You have to look at the GDP of Quad. The combined GDP of Quad is $33 trillion. And India is not part of TPP, India is not part of RCEP. And if we go in that direction of economic cooperation, then we see Quad becoming more of an economic agenda rather than a military agenda itself.
So, taking that forward, for each Quad member, China is the biggest trading partner. So, together they may have a very big GDP figure and so on and so forth. But the fact is that their dependence on China is undeniable.
That's true, which is what makes the challenge from China so difficult to handle, which is why countries that are concerned about the rise of authoritarian governments need to think about the full spectrum of governmental activities, from military alliances where appropriate, economic alliances and trade pacts where appropriate, other arrangements to bring countries closer together, to build that network that is going to be able to deal with the competition from China, because it is pervasive and it is acute, and it is something that needs to be dealt with by all of China's neighbors. So giving countries like India and the United States and Australia and Japan options for dealing with each other and with China is really hugely critical, and it's very popular here in Washington right now. This is a priority for the Trump administration and for the Biden administration. It's a priority in Congress. This is something where the two parties in Washington, which you often hear are at each other's throats, actually agree on.
There is bipartisan support for relationship with India, but when it comes to trade, India and Australia are talking about a free trade agreement. I understand Joe Biden is not a huge fan of free trade agreements either. Is there the political will for the Quad to take on China's predatory economic policy?
One of the wonderful aspects of our democracies is that we have to work out those issues internally. The United States is definitely struggling with trade issues right now. Neither party is fully embracing a free trade agenda. I think that works to the detriment of our country, but it's something that we have to work through politically. I think in India, similar phenomena. You need to work through these issues with the people and their representatives. That's what's going to be sustainable over the long term.
Two important meetings that the Prime Minister of India is going to have today. One is with Scott Morrison and the other is with Prime Minister Suga of Japan. What do you think is going to be on top of the agenda for these?
I think it'll be a similar agenda to the one with President Biden, talking through, sharing information and impressions about the security situation, talking about practical cooperation on important topics, including, in the case of, I think, Japan in particular, climate, but also the COVID issues and vaccine initiative, and thinking over the horizon toward the future. I think in all of these nations, it's a great opportunity to have them gathered here in Washington, consider themselves a mutual support network, and by sharing information and thinking of ideas together related to China, some indirectly related to China, some directly, some not so much, make forward progress on a lot of stuff.
What about the meeting with Kamala Harris? What can we expect?
Well, I think the meeting with Kamala Harris is more about getting to know her, because she did make comments when Jaishankar, the foreign minister, came to DC a couple of years ago, and there was a fallout with Pramila Jayapala. So I think it's time to work out with the progressive left of the Democratic Party, and Kamala Harris, will work on that. But I think more important is, again, the meeting also is going to focus on economic. It's going to focus a lot on de-risking supply chain. You have to understand, India exports 40% of the US generic drugs, and 70% of the API India gets is from China. So you will have a lot of discussion on the trade side. But I think the meeting with Kamala Harris is more about getting to know her.
Yes. Nobody talks about Afghanistan. Is that a footnote already?
I don't think so. I actually think it's a very big deal here in Washington, and I think part of the reason the Biden administration is investing so much in these discussions that are happening today and tomorrow is because they want to turn the page from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a debacle, it remains a debacle, but the administration wants to show that it's moving on from the debacle to new opportunities for the United States. It's not unlike the situation during Vietnam when the Nixon administration turned towards an opening to China to change the geostrategic situation. So I think it's actually very smart by the administration to do this, and that doesn't mean they shouldn't be addressing Afghanistan, which remains a problem and the U.S. has to deal with, but this is actually a pretty sensible approach.
How can India ensure that that as a strategic partner, America respects India's concerns? The U.S. is talking about dealing with the Taliban. Someone even called them businesslike and professional in their approach from the State Department. At the same time, we know that there is a real concern vis-a-vis New Delhi. There are terror safe havens, and the Taliban are making statements like there is no ISIS Khorasan, there is no Al-Qaeda operating in Afghanistan.
Yes.
The Americans are working with the Pakistanis. We know that they're working on an Afghan quad. How do you reconcile the two?
I think there's a shared concern between both Washington and New Delhi about counterterrorism. That's something that obviously affects the United States, greatly affects India. And I think, to build on what Lester said, the U.S. has withdrawn from Afghanistan as a occupying power, but the original mission for that intervention was counterterrorism. And I think that that's going to be the top item on the agenda. Now, saying nice things about the Taliban, that might be a tactical approach in the short term. But clearly the real friends are nations like India that are peaceful and trying to protect themselves from the terrorist threat. So I actually think that Afghanistan is going to be right at the top of the agenda in the meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. And they might not say that much publicly about it, but I think they'll talk about it a lot.
Since taking office in 2014, this is Prime Minister Modi's 7th visit to the United States. That's one visit almost every year. Do you think it's one of the most significant, and do you think this is taking the relationship in a new direction?
No, absolutely. I think every time he's come to the country, he's connected with the Indian diaspora, he's connected with the legislative side, and definitely has built a relationship from Obama down to Trump to President Biden. I believe that when we look at from a corporate perspective and or from an administration perspective, India plays a much, much stronger pivotal role as time goes by. There are convergence of interest, and you will see that the relationship will go much, much further as time goes by.
We'll have to see 8 meetings today and a lot more that's expected tomorrow. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts here on Gravitas. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda. Kushaq, choose what really matters.